What if you're not who you think you are? What if I told you you're not who you think you are? What if everything you were taught about human history, the Great Migration, the rise of civilization, the triumph of Homo sapiens over all others, was missing the one truth that changes it all? What if the story of you didn't begin in a cradle of upright apes in Africa, but in a flickering firelight when two pairs of eyes met across a species divide? Take a deep breath. No, really. Inhale. Feel your chest rise. That oxygen. Your ability to process it efficiently to survive in thin mountain air or long-distance runs. You didn't inherit that from some fitness influencer. You got it from a being scientists said died out 40,000 years ago. Look at your skin, its colour, its texture, its ability to tan or burn, its tendency to hold vitamin D under grey skies or resist frostbite in the snow. Not purely human, not the kind of human you were told you were, not just Homo sapiens. Yes, you're part Neanderthal. It's not a metaphor, it's not mythology, it's genetics, data, blood. And for decades scientists knew. They knew the truth pulsing under our skin, etched in the double helix of our DNA. But they weren't ready for what it meant, not just for anthropology, but for identity. Because the idea of us being unique, separate, superior was comforting. It meant we earned this world, that we were the final form of human evolution. But we weren't. We weren't the end of the story. We were the remix, the blend, the survivors and the inheritors of those we once called other. Wind back the clock, 50,000 years, to a night lit only by firelight and stars, in a cave somewhere in what's now France or Israel or Iraq, two kinds of humans lock eyes. One, tall and wiry, with high cheekbones, deep eyes, and curiosity carved into his every movement. The other, stocky and powerful, with massive brow ridges, a wide nose, and eyes shaped by 300,000 winters. We call one Homo sapiens, the other Neanderthal. What happens next isn't conquest. It's not war. Not yet. What happens next is silence. A breath held between species, a flicker of recognition. And then love. Yes, love. Forbidden. Impossible. World-changing. Because from that firelit union would come something no scientist, no priest, no philosopher could have predicted. You. But this isn't a love story. Not really. It's a ghost story. It's a murder mystery. It's a tale of extinction and survival, of genocide and romance, of memory written in molecules. It's the story of how we became the only humans left on a planet that once held at least 6. And it starts with the lie we all learned, that we, Homo sapiens, conquered the world because we were better, smarter, more evolved. That the Neanderthals disappeared because they couldn't keep up, that they were primitive, grunting cave brutes, doomed from the start. Wrong. Every bit of it. Wrong. They had language, they had music, they had burial rituals and jewellery and cave paintings thousands of years before we ever reached their territory. They weren't them, they were us, a different kind of us. And they didn't vanish. They became part of us. In December 2024, scientists dropped a bombshell. 2 landmark studies, years in the making, analysed tens of thousands of genomes from every continent. The results? Devastating. Beautiful. World-altering. They proved what fringe researchers and quiet whispers had long suspected. We didn't replace the Neanderthals. We absorbed them. We didn't outthink them. We outlasted them. Barely. We didn't prove superiority. We proved adaptability. We survived not by staying pure, but by becoming impure. By merging, mixing, changing. We became human by becoming something else. If you're of European descent, you're about 2% Neanderthal. If you have Asian ancestry, that number climbs to 4%. And if you think your ancestors never met Neanderthals because they stayed in Africa, think again. Ancient back migrations from Eurasia carried Neanderthal DNA into the heart of the continent. No pure humans remain, not one. Every living human being is a hybrid, the children of that ancient night by the fire, the products of war and love, of violence and vulnerability. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because if we accept this, if we embrace the truth, then everything changes. Racism becomes a joke told against our own blood. Nationalism becomes a denial of genetic reality. Superiority collapses into absurdity. We can't look down on our cousins when their blood pumps through our hearts. We can't talk about us versus them when the them is literally part of us. But it goes deeper than politics. Neanderthal genes shape how you sleep, whether you're a morning lark or a night owl. They influence your pain tolerance, your immune system, your risk of depression, your metabolism. They whisper in your bones, in your dreams, in the quiet moments when you feel like a stranger to yourself. Because you are. You're not purely human. You're not what you think you are. You're the echo of ancient footsteps. You're a walking fossil with fire in your chest and memory in your blood. You're a Neanderthal's great-great-grandchild, and you never even knew. So the question is not, am I part Neanderthal? You are. The question is, what does that mean? What do you do with that truth? How does it change the way you see yourself, your family, your history? Can you carry that inheritance with pride, knowing that love and violence, extinction and survival live side by side in your DNA? Can you accept that your humanity was never meant to be pure, but powerful precisely because it was blended? So buckle up, because this journey is only beginning. Tonight, you'll meet the ghosts in your blood, the heavy-browed, strong-jawed ancestors whose deaths made your life possible. You'll witness the crimes we committed and the children we created. You'll step into caves where species collided and history changed forever. And by the end of this story, you will never look in the mirror the same way again. Welcome to the truth. Breath of the ancients. Take a deep breath. Do it slowly. Feel your lungs expand like bellows. Feel the oxygen rushing into your blood like river water into parched soil. Now hold it. That breath isn't just yours. It's borrowed. It's inherited. It's ancient. You're breathing with the lungs of ghosts. Because the way your body handles air, the efficiency of your red blood cells, the way your chest rises and falls, your tolerance for altitude or cold didn't evolve in a vacuum. You didn't invent that breath. You inherited it from ancestors who didn't survive but whose adaptations did. Let's start with the air. Thin, cold, sharp. Imagine standing at 15,000 feet above sea level in Tibet, or the Andes, or the Ethiopian highlands. You should be gasping. You should be dizzy. You should be dying. But you're not, because your body knows what to do. Your blood makes more hemoglobin, your capillaries expand, you adapt quickly. But not because of anything you did. You're drawing on a genetic inheritance from hominins who walked these altitudes long before you ever heard the word altitude. You're breathing with the lungs of Denisovans. In 2010, inside a dark Siberian cave called Denisova, scientists discovered a tiny fragment of bone, just the tip of a pinky finger. It changed everything. The DNA didn't match Homo sapiens. It didn't match Neanderthals. It was something else, a lost cousin, a ghost lineage. We named them Denisovans. And here's the twist. They live on inside us. Today, Tibetan Highlanders carry a unique gene called EPAS1. It helps their blood absorb oxygen in low-pressure environments. Without it, life at high elevation would be nearly impossible. That gene, it doesn't come from Homo sapiens, it doesn't even come from Neanderthals. It comes from Denisovans, a gift from an ancient rendezvous on a windy plateau 40,000 years ago. A secret written in blood. Now step into the sun. Feel it on your face. Too long and you'll burn. Too little and your bones may soften from lack of vitamin D. But some of us tan, some burn, some soak up sunshine like a sponge, others reflect it like a mirror. Why? Because the sun is not just light. It's a test, a trial, and our skin, our colour, our texture, our reaction to ultraviolet radiation isn't just cosmetic. It's evolutionary memory. Neanderthals spent hundreds of thousands of years in the cloudy forests and snowy plains of Ice Age Europe. Little sunlight, short days, long winters. So they evolved pale skin not for beauty, but for survival. Pale skin absorbs vitamin D more efficiently. It keeps bones strong, immune systems alert. And today, if you're of European or Central Asian descent, that same adaptation runs through your skin. You inherited Neanderthal pigmentation genes variants that control how melanin responds to sunlight. And here's the twist. Neanderthal skin wasn't all pale. Some had reddish tones, freckles, even combinations we don't see today. The palette of prehistory was more complex than we imagined, and now your skin, whatever colour it is, might still whisper with echoes of those ancient shades. You're wearing the camouflage of a cousin who died 40,000 years ago. But breath and skin are just the beginning. Let's talk about sleep. Or rather, the war in your body between night and day. Why are you a night owl? Or why do you wake up before the sun? Why do some people thrive in darkness, while others collapse without dawn? It's not just lifestyle, it's genetics. Recent studies show Neanderthal DNA influences circadian rhythms, the internal clocks that govern sleep and wake cycles. In fact, researchers discovered that certain Neanderthal variants make people more likely to be morning people. Others make them more nocturnal. Why does this matter? Because in Ice Age Europe, life was dictated by extreme seasonal changes. Winters were long, dark, unforgiving. Adapting to those cycles meant survival. Now, when you lie awake at night unable to sleep or find yourself alert before sunrise, don't blame caffeine or stress. Blame the shadows of ancestors whose eyes adjusted to Arctic twilight. Your sleep cycle isn't broken, it's inherited. Let's go deeper, to your immune system. The army inside your body, millions of white blood cells trained to recognize invaders, to fight viruses, to heal wounds. That army, part of it was trained by Neanderthals. Their genes equipped us with resistance to pathogens we'd never encountered before. When Homo sapiens moved into Europe and Asia, we walked into a microbial battlefield. Cold climate bacteria, new parasites, diseases we'd never seen. But Neanderthals had already been fighting them for millennia, and when we interbred with them, we gained their weapons. Today, some of your innate immune responses, especially ones that react to skin and gut infections, can be traced directly to Neanderthal DNA. But it's a double-edged sword. That heightened immune vigilance also increases your risk for allergies, autoimmune diseases, even depression. The defense came with a cost, because evolution is never perfect, only good enough. You carry the scars of battles you never fought. What about your body shape? Do you run hot or cold? Can you gain muscle easily? Are your limbs longer or shorter than average? Look again. Neanderthals were built like tanks, barrel-chested, wide-hipped, short limbs to conserve heat, massive muscle mass. Some of their genes influence how fat is stored in modern bodies, especially around the waist and hips. Others affect how our bodies process calories in cold environments. That stubborn winter weight, it may not be your fault. It may be survival code from a time when starving to death was a weekly risk. Even today, those same genes influence how you regulate temperature and store energy. You're not just carrying fat, you're carrying firewood for an ice age. Your scalp, your pain tolerance, your sense of smell, all touched by extinct cousins. Some people have thicker hair strands, a trait linked to Denisovan ancestry. Others feel pain differently, thanks to Neanderthal variations in pain perception. Even how you smell smoke, musk, or sweat is partially shaped by archaic DNA. And while we're here, yes, even your brain. Neanderthal variants influence how neurons form in the cerebral cortex. They may affect mood, memory, and even social behavior. Do you feel more anxious in crowds? Do you react strongly to stimuli others ignore? That too might be the echo of a brain shaped in a very different world. Your body is not just yours. It is a museum, a layered archive, a war map. Every cell, every breath, every heartbeat is built from evolutionary trade-offs. Gifts from species who died so that pieces of them could live on in you. Neanderthals, Denisovans, maybe others we haven't even discovered yet. Ghosts in the blood. And yet we walk through the world as if we are singular, as if we are modern, as if the past ended and we began. But the truth is simpler, stranger, and far more beautiful. You're not modern. You're not ancient. You are both. The breath in your lungs, the sunlight on your skin, the dreams in your sleep, they're all echoes. And when you look in the mirror, you're seeing the living legacy of entire species that once ruled this earth. You're breathing with borrowed lungs, fighting with borrowed cells, thinking with borrowed minds. You're not purely Homo sapiens. You never were. Love across the divide. It began with a glance. Not a clash of swords, not a battle cry, not a declaration of dominance, but a look. Two pairs of eyes meeting in the flickering shadows of a cave. One set belonged to a stranger, tall, wiry, dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, a Homo sapiens. The other heavier brows, broader nose, paler skin that had never seen the African sun, a Neanderthal. And in that moment, 50,000 years ago, in a cave lit by fire and surrounded by ice, something impossible happened. They didn't fight, they didn't flee, they stayed, and something ancient, something fragile, something sacred began. Not a conquest, a union. This wasn't supposed to happen. For hundreds of thousands of years, two species had evolved on separate continents. In Africa, our ancestors agile, social, endlessly curious. Gracile frames built for running, dark skin for the tropical sun, and something else, a brain wired for metaphor, myth, music. In Europe and Western Asia, the Neanderthals. Barrel-chested, ice-adapted, built for close-range hunting, survivors of bitter winters, with bodies evolved for cold and darkness. They were powerful, resilient, and entirely other. The experts told us they couldn't mix, that the gap between species was too wide, that love or even reproduction was impossible. They were wrong. We used to believe that humans came to Europe as conquerors, that we marched in with fire and strategy and speech and swept the Neanderthals into extinction. But the archaeological record tells a different story. It tells us about overlap, about caves where both species lived sometimes together, about tools layered in alternating strata, Neanderthal, then sapiens, then Neanderthal again, not invasion, not obliteration. A back-and-forth dance that lasted 100,000 years. And in that long twilight of blurred territories and cold nights, something unexpected occurred. Intimacy. We found the proof in our cells. In a Romanian cave, scientists unearthed the remains of a young man. He lived 40,000 years ago. His DNA stunned the world. 6 to 9% Neanderthal. Not from a distant ancestor hundreds of generations removed, but from someone just 4 to 6 generations earlier. A great-great-grandmother, or grandfather. Not theory, not myth, family. He was the living child of two human worlds. His bones spoke the unthinkable. Love across the divide was not only possible, it happened often enough to leave descendants. But this wasn't a fairy tale. It was complicated, messy, painful, beautiful. The genes tell a story our words can't. We find Neanderthal DNA in the nuclear genome inherited from both parents. But in our mitochondria, the maternal line, there's silence. Almost no trace of Neanderthal DNA. What does that mean? It means the pairings that produced surviving children were likely Neanderthal males and modern human females. The reverse? Rare, almost absent. Scientists like Dr. Fernando Mendez have a chilling explanation. Neanderthal Y chromosomes carried mutations that triggered maternal immune responses. Modern human women who mated with Neanderthal men often miscarried, or their children didn't survive. The price of love across species boundaries was sometimes death. Yet they kept trying. In a cave in Siberia, Denisova, we found something astonishing. The bone of a teenage girl. She had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, a child born from two entirely different archaic species. They met, they mated, they made a daughter. In that one moment, three human species, Homo sapiens, Neanderthal and Denisovan, became part of the same story. Not a love triangle, a love web. A world more complex, more tangled and more intimate than we ever imagined. And the evidence isn't just in DNA. It's in artifacts, it's in fire pits shared by two kinds of toolkits. It's in ornaments, modern human beads found in caves previously thought to be Neanderthal strongholds. And it's in burials. At Israel's Kafse cave, a young child was buried 100,000 years ago. Not just with flowers or stones, but with deer antlers, a tradition found at Neanderthal sites, not sapiens ones. Someone who knew both cultures, who honoured both customs, buried that child with love. A hybrid child, a child who belonged to both worlds and neither. But love, like genetics, isn't always kind. Hybrid males often couldn't reproduce. Their Y chromosomes clashed with incompatible maternal genes. Many were sterile, outcasts, genetic dead ends. What happens when your tribe can't claim you, when your children are impossible, when your body says yes but your blood says no? Some became shamans perhaps, otherworldly, half spirit, half man, mediators between worlds. Some became warriors, fighting to prove worth where biology failed. Some wandered, lost, the first lonely ones, the first to ask, "Where do I belong?" But for all the sorrow, there was hope. Because for every tragic ending, there was a child who did survive. And when they did, they passed on something miraculous. Unity. Inside their bodies, two evolutionary histories coexisted. Two bloodlines twined like roots of the same tree. Two ways of seeing the world, the Neanderthal's strength. The sapiens' imagination combined in one form. That's not a tragedy. That's a beginning. The beginning of us. Today, every human of non-African ancestry carries 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. These aren't meaningless percentages. They're people. They're grandparents long dead but never gone. They gave you the gene that helps you fight flu or sleep longer or tan better or handle pain differently. You carry their fragments in your muscles, your skin, your mind. You are living proof of an impossible love story. You are the result of a kiss that echoed for 2,000 generations. So what was that first meeting really like? A warm spring night or a bitter cold morning? Two groups passing through the same valley, one lighting a fire, the other drawn by curiosity or hunger. And two figures stepping out of shadows, seeing each other not as monsters, not as enemies, but as familiar, not the same, but not different enough to matter. A wordless conversation, a tentative gesture, a shared meal, a song hummed, a hand outstretched, and a decision made not by logic, not by strategy, but by heart. To touch, to stay, to try. And in that moment, in that union, the future was born. Not just the genetic future, not just the physical child, but a future where boundaries blur, where otherness fades, where survival doesn't come from separation but from merging, from risking the unknown, from reaching across fear, from saying, "You're different, but I still choose you." We like to think of prehistory as violent, savage, brutal, and it was. But it was also tender. It was also intimate. It was also filled with moments of extraordinary courage and quiet, rebellious love. Because it's one thing to fight a rival, it's another to embrace them. And in that ancient embrace was the beginning of everything we are. You're not just human. You're a bridge, a love letter written in bones, a fusion that outlasted time. And when you look at yourself, truly look, know this. The most human thing about you might be that you're not fully human. You are the child of a great love between two species that the world said could never meet. But they did. And you are the proof. The first murder. The skeleton lay twisted, cold, alone, silent beneath the soil for 50,000 years. But it still had something to say. A rib shattered, a stone spearhead buried deep in the side of his chest, a puncture wound that missed the heart but pierced the lung, clean, precise, intentional. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a hunting mishap. This was something darker, colder, personal. This was murder, and not just any murder. This may have been the first one, the first documented human-on-human killing in the fossil record. And the victim? He wasn't a Homo sapiens. He was a Neanderthal. His name is Shanidar III. Or rather, that's what we call him now. He didn't have a name, no recorded lineage, no written eulogy, just a hole in his chest and a message frozen in time. He was found in Iraqi Kurdistan in the Shanidar cave, a place once lit by firelight echoing with the sounds of survival. In 1960, archaeologist Ralph Selecki brushed away the dust of ages and uncovered a body that would rewrite history. What he found wasn't just a fossil, it was a crime scene. Shanidar III was around 40 years old when he died. Middle-aged by Neanderthal standards, he was stocky, strong, well-fed, and he had been stabbed by a spear unlike any his people used. A lightweight throwing spear, slender, streamlined, engineered for distance. The kind of weapon only one species on Earth wielded at that time, Homo sapiens. The damage was clear. The weapon had entered below the ribs, at a downward angle, too narrow and forceful to be close range. It wasn't a clubbing injury, not a fight gone wrong. This was a strike from afar, deliberate, lethal. But it gets worse. The wound showed signs of healing. Shanidar III didn't die immediately. He survived. For days, maybe weeks, maybe months. He likely coughed blood, struggled to breathe, his lung collapsing slowly, infection spreading like smoke through a dry forest. Someone had tried to kill him, and then left him to suffer. Dr. Stephen Churchill of Duke University became obsessed with solving the mystery. He recreated the scenario using pig carcasses and replica weapons. He tested force, angles, velocity. He ruled out accidental trauma. He ruled out Neanderthal weapons. Only one conclusion made sense. This was homicide committed by a modern human. For the first time in the fossil record, we had forensic evidence of something we'd always suspected, but never confirmed. We didn't just coexist with Neanderthals, we killed them. But if this was the first murder, what does that make us? Are we the heroes of our evolutionary tale or the villains? Because Shanidar III wasn't the only one. All across Europe and Asia, Neanderthal remains tell similar stories. Skulls with bashed-in foreheads, arms with defensive wounds, raised to block a blow, broken bones that never healed, mass graves where every skeleton bears the marks of violence. The archaeological record doesn't lie. It paints a picture more chilling than we dared to imagine. Systematic violence, slow-motion genocide, 100,000 years of Cold War punctuated by blood. We like to tell ourselves we were smarter, that we won because of language, art, strategy, innovation. But what if that's only half the story? What if we didn't just outthink the Neanderthals? What if we outfought them, outnumbered them, ambushed them, erased them? What if our greatest evolutionary edge was not brilliance, but cruelty, and yet somehow we love them too? This is the paradox at the heart of our origins. We made love to the same species we may have murdered. Our enemies were also our partners, our rivals, our mates. The same spear that killed Shanidar III may have been held by someone whose child carried near some Neanderthal blood. What kind of species does that? What kind of creature kills a cousin then raises their child? We do. This isn't just history, it's psychology, it's anthropology, it's a mirror. What happened in that cave 50,000 years ago wasn't just the first murder, it was the first moral dilemma, and it still haunts us, because violence lives in us, deep down, passed on with our genes alongside laughter, memory, and love. We are capable of compassion so great it reshapes the world, and violence so vast it scars the earth. We didn't evolve beyond our brutal beginnings, we built on them. Our laws, our cities, our religions, they're scaffolding around the darkness we inherited. A darkness that first flickered in that cave. But here's what makes Shanidar III's story even more haunting. Someone buried him. Not hastily, not like garbage, with care, with intention. The other Shanidar skeletons found nearby show signs of ritual burial. One was laid gently in a sleeping position. Another was sprinkled with pollen evidence of flower offerings. Did Homo sapiens return to the scene of the crime and bury the dead? Or was it his own kind who honoured him in death? Either way, someone stood over Shanidar III's body and said, "This was a life worth mourning, even if it was a life they helped end." The story doesn't stop there. After decades of silence, Shanidar Cave spoke again. In 2018, archaeologists discovered new Neanderthal remains of partial skeleton, beautifully preserved, lying beneath a stone platform, with vertebrae, ribs, and even finger bones intact. This wasn't a body dumped, it was placed, positioned, buried. More proof that Neanderthals were not the brutes we imagined. They were mourners, storytellers, builders of meaning. Their deaths meant something to them and to us. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we face the truth that the very blood in our veins may have been passed down not just through love, but through violence? We want to believe we're the noble survivors, the wise ones, the chosen. But maybe survival isn't about purity, or goodness, or superiority. Maybe it's about complexity, contradiction, carrying both the torch and the blade. We are not innocent. We never were. Our origin story is written in both lullabies and war cries, in spears and in cradles, in graves and in genes. And if you listen closely, beneath the roar of modern life, you can still hear the echoes of that cave, the rustle of a dying breath, the quiet thud of a body hitting earth, the hush of a hand laying a flower beside a fallen cousin, the silence after a murder, and the sorrow that followed. Shanidar III is not just a fossil, he is a message, a warning, a mirror. He reminds us that we're capable of extraordinary connection and unspeakable cruelty, that love and violence can share a bed, that evolution is not clean, not fair, not kind, but it is true. And the truth is this: we are not purely Homo sapiens, we are not purely killers, we are not purely lovers. We are both. We are hybrids in body and in morality. And when we tell the story of our species, we must start not with triumph, but with reckoning. Because before we built the pyramids, before we painted on cave walls, before we wrote poems or planted wheat, we committed our first murder. And the skeleton still lies in the dark, its shattered ribs whispering, "This is who you are, do not forget me." The battle for the continent. Forget the 100 Years' War. Forget World War I, World War II, or any empire's conquest across maps drawn in ink. This was a war not written in books, but in bones, in broken spears, in bloodlines. A war that raged not over decades, but millennia. 100,000 years. And the battlefield? It was the very land beneath your feet. The prize? The right to call this continent home? They came from the south. Tall, dark-skinned, slender with eyes sharp as obsidian and minds burning with curiosity. Homo sapiens fresh from the savannah, armed with new tools and even newer thoughts. They stepped into a world that was already claimed. Because Europe, Asia, the cold northern forests and rolling steppe plains, these weren't empty. They were home to another kind of human, broader, paler, thicker-boned, adapted to the cold, strong enough to bring down mammoths with thrusting spears, smart enough to survive 10 ice ages. They were Neanderthals, and they had ruled here for over 300,000 years until now. This wasn't an invasion, not at first. It was a trickle of footsteps, families migrating slowly, following herds, chasing warmth, carrying stories etched in ochre and shell. But behind every step forward was a pressure, population growth, hunger, ambition, a biological tide rising slowly toward the coasts of Europe. And like two tectonic plates, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals met, not with a bang, but with a long grinding collision, a war with no name, no sides, no treaties, but one outcome. The archaeological record is a map of ghosts. At School Cave in Israel, we find Homo sapiens living 120,000 years ago. Then they disappear, replaced by Neanderthals. At Kafze, same pattern. Modern humans arrive, flourish briefly, then vanish. The Neanderthals return. And again, and again, and again. For 100,000 years. Advance, retreat, progress, collapse. Not conquest, stalemate. What kind of war lasts 100,000 years? A war of migration, of seasonal claims, of sudden encounters and long absences, of small clashes that echoed for generations. There were no generals, no flags, just campsites and bloodstains, just footprints left in mud that hardened into memory. And yet, the stakes couldn't have been higher, because only one species would survive. The Neanderthals had the advantage. They knew the land, the caves, the game trails, the seasons. Their bodies were perfect machines for cold survival, with wide noses to warm frigid air, dense bones for power, and brains larger than ours. Yes, larger. They weren't stupid. They buried their dead. They made tools. They painted. They made jewellery. They just did it differently. And for a time, that difference gave them the upper hand. They pushed us back again and again. But something changed. Not in their weapons, not in their muscles, in their minds. Because Homo sapiens didn't fight alone. We fought as a network. We were wired for connection, for gossip, for alliances, for shared myths. We could tell stories around fires, stories that made strangers into brothers, ideas that turned hunters into armies. A Neanderthal might fight for family, but a sapiens would fight for a god, for a symbol, for a cause. We learned to organize, to coordinate ambushes across regions, to plan seasons ahead. We didn't have stronger arms. We had stronger narratives. Still, it wasn't easy. Europe was a fortress, a maze of mountain ranges and cave systems. Neanderthals had the high ground. Vindiga Cave in Croatia, El Cedron in Spain, Mesmarskaya in Russia. These weren't just shelters, they were strongholds, occupied, defended, held for tens of thousands of years. And they didn't fall quietly. Evidence of pit traps, defensive formations, spear tips embedded in bone. This wasn't a one-sided slaughter. Neanderthals fought back, hard. And for a long time they held the line. Then came the ice. Heinrich, event of 4. A sudden brutal plunge in global temperature. Europe froze. Rivers became glaciers. Forests died. Game vanished. Suddenly there was no room for two species. Territories shrank, margins narrowed, and the buffer between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens collapsed. The front lines moved into caves, into families, into DNA. This is where strategy turned to something darker. Homo sapiens did not defeat Neanderthals with superior strength. We defeated them with superior numbers, larger clans, faster reproduction, better communication, and one devastating adaptation: deceit. We could plan ambushes, fake retreats, pretend peace and strike at night. We had language, abstract thinking. We could imagine the future and sacrifice today for tomorrow. That's not just a cognitive leap. That's a weapon. But even as we warred, we shared. Tool techniques passed between groups. Neanderthal stonework appeared at sapiens camps. Sapiens jewelry showed up in Neanderthal graves. It was cultural osmosis, an exchange in the midst of conflict. Even enemies couldn't help but learn from each other. Because this war wasn't black and white. It was a blur, a spectrum. And somewhere in that fog of war, a Neanderthal touched a sapien's hand and didn't pull away. So how do you tell this story? Was it a genocide, a migration, a slow erosion of an ancient species? The answer is yes and no, and something in between. Because the war for the continent wasn't just fought in blood, it was fought in cradles. Children were born, hybrids, bridges between worlds, proof that even in war, love finds a way. But these children lived in a paradox. Too sapiens to be Neanderthal, too Neanderthal to be sapiens. Most died young, genetic dead ends, silent stories. But some lived, some thrived, some passed on their blood and their burdens to us. Today, every person of non-African descent carries Neanderthal DNA, not because of peace, but because of a war so long it became ancestry. This isn't a story of victory, it's a story of absorption. We didn't defeat the Neanderthals. We became them, piece by piece, child by child, memory by memory. So next time someone tells you that evolution is simple, that we outcompeted our cousins because we were smarter, better chosen, remember this. The war for the continent was not a conquest. It was a coin toss played over 100,000 years, and we barely won. Barely. Just one more volcanic winter, one more plague, one more poor harvest, and it could have been their story we were telling. In the end, the war left no victors, only survivors, only ghosts, only genes scattered like footprints across a battlefield now overgrown with time. And when you walk the forests of Europe, when you breathe the cold mountain air, or feel your jaw tighten in the snow, know this. You walk on ancient ground, where cousins clashed, where futures were decided, where history was not written in stone, but in bone, shadows in the caves. They crouched in the shadows, not hiding, not afraid, watching. Stone tools gripped in calloused hands, eyes trained on the tree line, listening to the crunch of foreign feet on snow-laced earth. We had arrived, modern humans, wiry, restless, moving with the confidence of newcomers who thought they'd discovered a forgotten land. But we weren't the first, and we weren't alone. Long before Homo sapiens set foot in Europe, the caves already had names, though none we could pronounce. They had shelters, graves, hearths that burned for generations. They had seen war and famine and the turning of glacial tides. These were not empty landscapes awaiting human brilliance. They were strongholds occupied, guarded, cherished. By those we would come to call Neanderthals, not monsters, not mistakes, not half-formed humans stuck in evolutionary purgatory, but a species in full, adapted, tested, resilient. And nowhere was that resilience more visible than in their fortresses of survival. Vindija, Mesmaskaya, El Sidron. These weren't just caves, they were citadels, choke points, strategic outposts in the world's longest war. When the ice rolled in like a silent army, Neanderthals didn't flee. They dug in, Vindija Cave, Croatia, a narrow limestone mouth yawning into darkness, high on a hillside commanding views of the valley below. From its ledge you could see for miles any approaching threat, any migrating herd. Inside, layers of habitation, stone tools, bones split to extract marrow, charcoal from long-dead fires, and DNA, lots of it. This was no temporary camp. This was a headquarters, and those who lived here, they weren't just surviving, they were observing. Vindija became the first cave to whisper something radical to science, that Neanderthals weren't gone. They were in us. Move east, to the Caucasus Mountains, Mesmaskaya Cave, Russia, tucked between cliff walls like a secret. Here archaeologists found a Neanderthal infant perfectly preserved, swaddled in the earth's cold arms. She had died around 40,000 years ago, likely from starvation, a child of hardship, of siege. But even in her death she told a story. Pollen traces near her burial, wildflowers placed with care. Not dumped, not forgotten, grieved. This wasn't the act of a brute. This was a funeral. In a war-torn world, the Neanderthals still mourned their young, even when the future was slipping from their grasp. Then, westward to the green mountains of northern Spain, El Sidron Cave, twisting narrow with caverns like lungs carved into the earth. Inside, the bones of 12 Neanderthals, men, women, children. But something was wrong. The bones bore strange marks, not from animals, not from age. From knives cut marks, deliberate, precise. Signs of butchery. The people of El Sidron may have eaten their own. Why? Not savagery, starvation. Trapped by ice. Resources gone, outpost isolated. No way out. Cannibalism was not their nature. It was their last resort. Even in desperation, they chose survival. What do these caves tell us? That Neanderthals weren't passive victims of evolution. They were tacticians, engineers, warriors. Their homes weren't random holes in the rock. They were placed within tent-along migration routes, above river crossings, within striking distance of game. They built what anthropologists now recognize as territorial control zones, defensive geography, natural fortifications, the ancient world's version of castles and trenches. They used more than muscle. They used strategy. New evidence from isotope studies suggests Neanderthals moved seasonally, tracking herds, weather, and perhaps even us. They knew when to stand their ground and when to vanish into the mist. At sites across France and Germany, we find signs of intermittent occupation. Neanderthals moved like shadows, appearing, disappearing, reappearing. Not beaten, calculating. They played the long game. And for most of that game they were winning. But something began to shift. Not in their bones, in their minds. Or rather in ours. Because while Neanderthals built strongholds, Homo sapiens built networks. Caves gave us shelter, but stories gave us power. Where Neanderthals passed down skills through imitation, we passed down symbols. We painted, we carved, We performed rituals that stretched imagination across time, and at some point Neanderthals started doing it too. At Bruniquel Cave in France, deep underground, archaeologists discovered a ring of broken stalagmites arranged in a circle over 175,000 years old. Older than any Homo sapiens art on record. It wasn't random, it was symbolic. They lit fires here, gathered here. For what? Ritual? Worship? Warning? We don't know. But it shattered the myth of the dull-witted Neanderthal. They had inner lives. They had meaning. They weren't watching us because they were behind. They were watching us because they understood us. Because they recognized something in us and in themselves. We weren't so different. And sometimes we shared more than tactics. At archaeological sites like Châtel-Perronien in France, we find Neanderthal tools shaped with modern human techniques. Shell ornaments, pigment use, pierced animal teeth. Cultural cross-pollination, imitation, or collaboration. Were we teaching each other in those contest caves? Were Neanderthal children learning beside ours? Did a Homo sapiens artisan hand a shell necklace to a thick-browed girl in a moment of wordless recognition? These weren't exchanges of war. They were moments of grace in the trenches. Still, the shadow of extinction loomed. The caves grew colder. The ice pressed in. Each generation of Neanderthals became fewer, more isolated, more interbred. Genetic bottlenecks shrank their diversity. Inbreeding led to disease, fragility. And yet they fought. They watched our numbers grow, our tools change, our maps expand. And they stayed, holding the line, until they couldn't. Vindija, Mesmaiskaya, El Cedron. The last whispers of a world fading, not with a bang, but a breath. A final ember in the fire before the cave falls silent. But they didn't vanish, not completely. They linger. In your bones, in your skin, in the way your lungs respond to cold air, in how you metabolize fat, in your sleep rhythms, in your pain receptors. They are still watching, not from the shadows this time, but from inside you. We once stood in those caves facing another version of ourselves across the fire, not knowing who would survive, not knowing what it meant to be human. They're gone, we remain, but the caves remember, the bones remember, and deep down so do we. Because we were never just the victors of an ancient war, we were its witnesses, its inheritors, its children. And the shadows in the caves, they were never shadows at all. They were our ancestors, weapons and whispers. They faced each other not just across battlefields, but across campfires, across centuries, across the fragile membrane of memory. Two kinds of human. One with a body like stone and a mind forged in ice. The other restless, lighter, wrapped in skins and ideas. They clashed with spears, yes, but also with tools, with symbols, with secrets passed between shadows. Because in the longest war in human history, the one that lasted 100,000 years, there were no spies. And yet, there was espionage. The archaeologists didn't see it at first. The bones were easy, the campsites, the burnt charcoal, the graves, but between the layers of sedimentin, the silence between species was a whisper, a borrowing, a theft, a learning. We were watching each other. Start in the south, Africa, 65,000 years ago. Modern humans were doing something strange, copying tools they hadn't invented. A new kind of blade appears at Howisson's port, sharp, efficient, unlike anything found earlier in Homo sapiens sites. Where did it come from? It resembled something older, from the north, from Neanderthal territories. We weren't inventing, we were imitating, and we weren't the only ones. In Europe, something astonishing emerged. The Châtel-Perronien culture. For decades, scientists thought it belonged to early Homo sapiens, or maybe a hybrid group. It had ornaments, pigments, and blades. Then the truth came out. Neanderthals made them. Bracelets, bone awls, beads, art. Not crude marks scratched in boredom, but deliberate decoration, personal expression, or perhaps something more, a message. They weren't just copying us, they were responding, speaking back in the only language that transcended blood creation. Imagine the exchange. A hunting party returns to its cave. A Neanderthal man carries a strange objector carved shell stained red. He didn't make it, he found it, or someone gave it to him. A trade? A gift? A token from a forbidden encounter? He shows his clan. They touch it, feel its weight, ask questions in a language lost to time. Then one of them picks up a stone and begins to carve. Not a weapon, not a tool, a pattern, an idea, reborn in a different mind. This is not how we imagine prehistory. We painted Neanderthals as static, the same spear for 200,000 years, the same cave, the same habits. But the archaeological record says otherwise. Toolkits changed, evolved, expanded, and always shortly after contact with modern humans. They weren't just resisting us, they were watching us, learning. It worked both ways. At sites like Eleusis in Italy, we find Homo sapiens adopting Neanderthal flake technology, not because we had to, because it worked. Their tools were sturdy, efficient, well suited for close-range ambushes and dense forests. We didn't just study them, we respected them, because in war, admiration is the most dangerous kind of truth. Think of the weapons. Neanderthals favoured thrusting spears heavy, deadly, close-quarter tools of brutal efficiency. Homo sapiens developed throwing spears lighter, faster, deadly from a distance. For a time, that gave us the edge. Then, Neanderthals started using them too. Evidence from sites like La Côte de Saint-Brelade suggests projectile use. Anatomical studies show shoulder adaptations not just for brute force, but for range. The conclusion? They didn't just fight back, they adapted. They learned our weapons. And in some cases, they improved them. But tools weren't the only things traded. Ideas were too. When you find a Neanderthal cave with Homo sapiens beads or a modern human burial with Neanderthal pigments, you're not looking at plunder. You're looking at exchange, a moment of contact, a whisper across the divide. What did they say? Did a Homo sapiens mother, weaving cord through bone beads, show a Neanderthal woman how it was done? Did they smile? Did they laugh? Or was it tense, a brief ceasefire in a war neither side fully understood? And then there were the stories. We have no Neanderthal words, no preserved myths, no cave-wall scripts. But we do have evidence of shared rituals, burials, fire ceremonies, traces of ochre on bones. The dead laid to rest with care, sometimes with tools, sometimes with flowers. Those aren't coincidences, they're beliefs. They speak of worldviews of meaning, of memory, and they suggest that somewhere in the war, in the long frost of competition, we weren't just enemies. We were peers. Even in death, we imitated each other. In Israel's Kafsa cave, Homo sapiens buried their dead with deer antlers, a Neanderthal tradition. In La Forassie, France, a Neanderthal child was buried with precision, head tilted, stone slab overhead, ochre sprinkled like stardust. Who learned from whom? It doesn't matter. Because it tells us one thing: we were watching each other closely, enough to copy, enough to care. So what do you call a war fought with tools and traditions, with copied blades and shared dreams? You call it a mirror? We thought we were fighting Neanderthals, but we were also fighting ourselves, our assumptions, our arrogance, our blind spot for kinship. Because every new Neanderthal discovery doesn't make them more like us. It makes us less exceptional, less alone, more intertwined, In 2015, geneticists sequenced a Neanderthal's genome from Vindija Cave. They didn't just find shared ancestry. They found shared adaptation genes for immunity, for brain function, for fat storage. We hadn't just traded tools, we traded flesh code destiny, a fusion not of weapons but of wills. And perhaps the greatest whisper of all wasn't in stone, or pigment, or firelight. It was in curiosity, the willingness to look across the divide and wonder what it meant to be human when someone not quite human looked back. The war never really ended, but something larger survived it. Us. We carry their whispers in our blood, their art in our imagination, their tools in the shape of our hands. They watched us from the shadows, and we learned from their gaze. Next time you hold a knife trace, a symbol tell a story around a fire, remember. It might not be yours, not entirely. It might be a Neanderthal idea, preserved, passed on, perfected. A gift from the war, a weapon once. Now a whisper, the war of minds. They say history is written by the victors. But what if victory was never about spears? What if it wasn't about strength or speed or even strategy? What if it was about something softer, something invisible, something that left no fossil behind? Not a muscle, a myth. The greatest weapon Homo sapiens ever wielded wasn't stone or fire or bone. It was the word, let's rewind, 100,000 years ago. A cold wind howls through the Levant. Two groups of humans stare across a contested valley. One is massive, barrel-chested, bred for survival. The other is wiry, strange, filled with restless movement. One has hunted these woods for millennia. The other has just arrived, bringing something the world had never seen before. Not a better spear, but a story. We're taught to see evolution in physical terms: skull shapes, limb lengths, tools chipped from flint. But the most profound difference between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals was not in the bones. It was in the mind, specifically the part of the mind that could do something astonishing. Speak what didn't exist. Neanderthals had language. We know this now from the shape of the hyoid bone, from neural pathways in preserved skulls, from the sophistication of their society. They spoke, but we lied. We conjured futures. We imagined gods. We invented laws. Our words weren't just tools. They were blueprints for entire worlds. Think of language not just as communication, but as enchantment. It allows a single human to infect another with an idea, a vision, a warning, a dream. Say the right phrase and a stranger will follow you into the dark. Whisper the right myth, and 1,000 will die for it. Build it big enough, we call it a civilization. This wasn't just talking. This was organizing. Neanderthals lived in small family bands, 15, 20 individuals at most. Tight-knit but limited. Too few to build armies. Too few to construct cultures larger than bloodlines. But Homo sapiens? We built networks. We gathered around symbols, totems, flags, faces we'd never seen but believed in. We told stories about shared ancestors, spirits in the sky, monsters in the forest. We turned rumor into religion, and religion into unity. Why does this matter? Because when resources shrank, when winters bit deeper and mammoths grew scarce, and territory grew tighter, cooperation became survival. Not just with kin, with strangers. And Homo sapiens were the only species that could convince strangers to cooperate at scale. How? Shared fiction. Yuval Noah Harari put it bluntly. You can't convince a chimpanzee to give you a banana by promising him banana heaven after death. But you can convince a human to give his life for a flag, or a god, or a bloodline, or an idea. That's the power Neanderthals never unlocked. And it changed everything. Imagine a Neanderthal group cunning, resourceful expert in their forest. Then imagine a band of Homo sapiens arrives. They're weaker, thinner, new to the terrain. But one among them tells a story that binds 20 other groups, a story that makes them brothers without blood. Suddenly, the Neanderthals aren't facing one family. They're facing a nation. Language made us dangerous, because it gave us not just communication, but coordination. We could plan ambushes with words, predict migration routes, name the seasons, pass warnings across generations. And Neanderthal saw what was in front of him. We saw what was coming, because someone told us. And we believed. Belief was our secret weapon. It didn't require truth. It required repetition. Say something often enough with enough conviction, and it becomes a reality people will die for. We learned to tell stories of enemies in the Hill 7 when there were none. To blame crop failure on witches. To bless victory as divine will. We learned to lie together. And in doing so, we learned to rule. This wasn't evolution through brawn. It was social engineering. A group of 30 Neanderthals could hunt more efficiently than we ever could, but a group of 300 Homo sapiens could build a settlement, an army, a memory that outlived its makers. We started building monuments to the unseen, and we never stopped. Even our tools began to tell stories, not just functional, symbolic. Paintings in Chauvet Cave, beads buried with the dead, figurines of wide-hipped women carved in ivory. What did they mean? Nobody knows. But everyone felt it, because they weren't meant just to be seen. They were meant to bind. Language gave us the power to transmit knowledge not just over space, but over time. A Neanderthal could teach his son to hunt. We could teach our descendants how to remember. The seasons, the stars, the gods, the kings. We told stories so often they became civilizations. That's how myths are born, and how wars are won. But there was a cost. Because the same voice that unites can also divide. The tongue that sings hymns can whisper hatred. With language came jealousy, fear, deception. We didn't just outsurvive Neanderthals. We may have outlied them. The archaeological record is silent on betrayal. There are no fossils of manipulation, no remains of propaganda. But the signs are there, in the sudden shifts, in the abandoned caves, in the evidence of trauma and retreat. We arrived with more than tools. We arrived with rumours. And perhaps, one whisper at a time, we made them monsters in our own minds, until killing them felt like destiny. Yet we still loved them, still bred with them, still mimicked them, still mourned them. Even as we conquered the land, some part of us looked back and remembered the first face that wasn't quite like ours, but close enough to understand. That's the contradiction of language. It creates gods and devils from the same alphabet. It builds bridges and blades from the same syllables. And once you know how to wield it, you never fight fair again. In 2024, a research team in Leipzig published something astonishing. They found that certain genes associated with speech and syntax once thought uniquely human were also present in Neanderthal DNA. But there was a difference. In us, those genes were hyperactive, overexpressed, unleashed. The switch had been flipped, and once it was on, there was no turning back. So here we are, the last humans standing, not because we were stronger, but because we could tell a better story. A story about us, about them, about what it meant to win. We wrote it in fire, we wrote it in blood, and then we wrote it down. But the war of minds isn't over. We still live by myths, still kill for flags, still follow the loudest voice in the room. The difference? Now we think that's normal, because it's been with us since the first time we told a story about a stranger who didn't quite look like us and believed it meant something. So next time you speak, remember what you're holding. It isn't just a voice. It's a weapon, a spell, a bridge, or a bomb. You are the descendant of the most dangerous storytellers in history. And somewhere in the silence that followed their extinction, a whisper still echoes. Not in bones, not in stone, but in the lies we still believe. Winter is here, the fire dimmed. The trees cracked with frost. The rivers turned to stone, and the wind howled through the valleys like a thing that remembered warmth but had forgotten mercy. Winter had come. But not just any winter, not the kind that ends with spring, not the kind you survive with fire and furs. This was something deeper, older, something that had been waiting. 45,000 years ago, the continent we now call Europe plunged into chaos. It began not with war, but with weather. A rapid climate shift. Heinrich, Event 4. The oceans convulsed. The Atlantic dumped icebergs into the deep, and all of Europe felt the shiver. Rain turned to sleet. Grasslands became frozen mudflats. The great forests withered into skeletal groves. This was no ordinary ice age. This was a turning point. And it would decide who lived and who would become a memory carved in stone. For the Neanderthals, this was supposed to be their terrain. They had survived countless winters, adapted to cold with wide noses, barrel chests, and lungs like furnaces. They knew the rhythm of the seasons, the migration of mammoths, the nesting of mountain birds, the shape of the stars in frozen skies. They had built their world on survival. But no world, not even theirs, was ready for this. The snow didn't fall gently, it attacked. It stripped the mountains of life. It closed the valleys with ice. It turned water into daggers and silence into an omen. Hunting grew harder, food scarcer, territory shrank. What had once been vast open ranges became contested, narrow corridors of dwindling prey and desperate predators. And not all of those predators had fur. Into this frozen crucible came us, Homo sapiens, the southern strangers, fire-makers, myth-bearers, word-wielders. We came from warmer lands, but we brought with us something new, adaptability, not just in body, but in belief. Where Neanderthals endured, we adapted. Where they remembered, we imagined. Where they resisted, we spread. Winter didn't just level a battlefield, it rewrote the rules, and suddenly our strange advantages became lethal. We wore tailored clothes, stitched with bone needles and sinew, designed not just for function but for mobility. We built more complex shelters. We huddled not just as families but as networks. We shared food across groups. We strategized. We didn't just survive the cold, we out-organized it. For the Neanderthals, isolation had been safety. Small bands, tight caves, familiar routes. But now that safety became a trap. Cut off, starving, waiting for a spring that never came. And while they waited, we moved. Quietly, efficiently, into their abandoned camps, onto their sacred hunting grounds. Through the valleys they once ruled. We followed the herds, we followed the signs, we followed the cold, and behind us, Neanderthal strongholds began to flicker and go out. One by one, cave by cave, name by forgotten name. But this wasn't a peaceful transition. There were no treaties, no terms, no surrender. This was the final act of the world's longest war. At the site of Goyer in Belgium, scientists found bones, Neanderthal bones, broken, butchered, smashed open for marrow. Cannibalism? Possibly. But also, perhaps, desperation. The act of a people with nowhere left to go, no more options, no more winters to hope through. At other sites, we find something even more chilling. Mass graves. Entire family groups buried hastily, some with signs of trauma, blunt force, pierced ribs, crushed skulls. Not from the cold, from violence, From us? Maybe. Because we had more than just numbers. We had language, we had strategy, and in war that makes all the difference. This was the age of the final push, and it wasn't about brute force. It was about persistence. We returned again and again, each generation creeping further north, filling every crack the cold opened. Neanderthal caves became Homo sapiens camps, their sacred hills our hunting blinds, their myths our forgotten memories. We didn't erase them in one blow. We replaced them in phases now, like the tide, slow, relentless, inevitable. But here's the part no one wants to admit. As the Neanderthal world collapsed, we didn't just move in. We also mourned. We carried some of them with us, in our blood, in our breath, in our dreams. Because just before the final snows fell, we loved them. Somewhere in a cave, a modern woman cradled a hybrid child, part Neanderthal, part Homo sapiens, born of ice and fire. And when her people moved on, she carried him, north, into a future where his kind would no longer be born but never truly be gone. Climate didn't just change the land. It changed the balance of power. It tested every species. And in that test, the question wasn't who was stronger. It was who could change. And we? We were made to change. At Mezmatskaya Cave in the Caucasus, scientists found the remains of a Neanderthal infant, dated to just before extinction, carefully buried, wrapped in furs, red ochre staining the soil. It was a goodbye, a quiet defiance against a world collapsing. Even in their last days, they buried their children with honour. That's not savagery. That's humanity. But there was no reprieve. The temperatures dropped again. The winds screamed louder. And somewhere, in a cave whose name is lost, the last pure Neanderthal took his final breath. No monument, no marker, just ice and silence. And when spring finally returned, it was ours. Europe had been claimed. The war was over. But the victory, it didn't feel like one. Because when the last campfire of the Neanderthals flickered out, something ancient died with them. A way of thinking, a way of being, a voice that had sung for 300,000 winters gone. But not entirely. Because inside you, yes, you are the embers, the genes, the instincts, the echoes. You carry the lungs that breathed Ice Age air, the skin that survived sunless months, the memories of stone and frost. Winter didn't just kill them, it wrote them into us. So next time you feel the cold bite, next time you watch frost paint your window, next time you step into snow and your breath clouds the air, remember, you're here because they were. Because in their final days, as the ice closed in, they gave us one last gift. Survival. Not by conquest, but by connection. The war ended in winter, but its legacy burns still in firelight, in blood, in the silent spaces between who we are and who we once were. Winter came, and in its wake we remained. The forbidden children. They shouldn't exist. By the laws of biology, the rules of species separation, the barriers meant to keep nature clean and neat, they were mistakes. And yet they were born. Children with bones too long or too wide, skulls that didn't quite match the charts, eyes like theirs, skin like ours, voices that sang songs no one else remembered, hybrids, biological paradoxes, the children of two kinds of humans who were never meant to meet, and yet, in secret, they did far more than meet. They lay together, they whispered, they loved, and sometimes from that love came life. But it wasn't easy. Not every union bore fruit, not every child survived. Because evolution doesn't forgive easily, and when species stray too far apart, biology pushes back. The womb rejects, the body rebels, cells fight, Hearts fail, and yet they kept trying. At a windswept site in Romania, scientists found him. Oase 1, a young man buried in layers of bone and time. When they examined his DNA, their breath caught. He carried 6 to 9% Neanderthal DNA, but not scattered, ancient fragments, long, intact stretches, like unbroken roads through his genome. Too recent to be distant, too close to ignore, this boy had a Neanderthal great-great-grandparent, 4 to 6 generations back, a face once seen by firelight, a name now lost to dust. Oase wasn't a one-off. He was proof, evidence that these unions didn't happen just once in the shadows. They happened again, and again, and again. But love across the species divide came at a price. A terrible one. Because not all children were Oase. Many were never born, many were born only to die. The genetic code, our most sacred scroll, was not always kind to hybrids. Start with the Y chromosome, a sliver of DNA passed from father to son, and in these forbidden children it often carried a curse. Neanderthal Y chromosomes, when passed into modern human mothers, often triggered immune rejection. The mother's body, programmed by millennia, recognized the child not as kin but as invader, and so it fought. Miscarriages, stillbirths, infant deaths. Love may have crossed the divide, but the body remembered the line. The numbers are stark. We find Neanderthal DNA in our nuclear DNA, the deep architecture of our cells, but not in our mitochondria. And mitochondria, the tiny engines that power life, are passed only through mothers, which means something devastating. Modern human males and Neanderthal females rarely produced surviving children. The reverse? It worked more often, but it wasn't without scars. Hybrid males faced another fate. They were born, they lived, but many could not reproduce. Their genes were like locked boxes. They looked strong, sounded healthy, fought bravely. But when it came time to pass on their lineage, nothing. Sterility. Nature's quiet cruelty. The hybrid line stopped with them. Dead ends in a family tree that once dreamed of branches. And yet, they kept being born. Despite the risk. Despite the failure. Because love, that most human of impulses, doesn't ask for permission. In Denisova Cave, deep in the Siberian cold, archaeologists found her. A teenage girl. Her mother, Neanderthal. Her father, Denisovan. Another archaic human species. 3 species Neanderthal, Denisovan, and Homo sapiens all mixing in one frozen chamber of life. It wasn't just sex. It was relationship-sustained contact. Shared spaces, shared fire. 7,000 years of it. We see the echoes everywhere, in graves, in DNA, in the curve of a brow, the shape of a tooth. Some children were mourned, others remembered. At the site of La Garvello in Portugal, they found a 4-year-old boy, half Neanderthal, half modern, laid gently to rest. Thousands of years after the supposed extinction. He was too Neanderthal for one world, too modern for the other. He lived in the cracks, between stories, between species. A ghost with a name. And then there were the ones we never found. The ones who wandered, rejected by both sides. Not fully accepted by Neanderthal kin. Not quite trusted by Homo sapiens bands. Imagine their lives, no tribe, no language that fit. No face that mirrored theirs. Did they become shamans, carrying knowledge too strange to explain? Did they fight for belonging, or did they vanish into the forests, their stories ending in silence? The hybrid children were not a mistake. They were a message. Proof that even when species war, they can also love. Even when nature resists, life pushes forward. Not because it's easy, but because it's true, and they gave us gifts. Make no mistake. Some of the genes that make your immune system strong, that help you fight viruses and bacteria, they come from those forbidden unions. Neanderthal adaptations to harsh, cold climates. Denisovan genes that let Tibetans breathe high mountain air. You are here because they loved, and because their children, against all odds, survived. Not all, not even most, but enough. There's one more truth, a darker one. Most of those lines died out. Oase1's DNA? Gone. His descendants vanished from history, extinct in silence. The Lagarvello boy, his bloodline did not reach you. Time and again the hybrid branches snapped off. Too fragile, too few, too misunderstood. But those who made it, who endured the pain of biology and the brutality of culture, they reshaped humanity. Because in the long arc of evolution, the purebred vanish and the blended survive. There is no such thing as a pure human. Not anymore. We are mosaics, mixtures, whispers of ancient species stitched together. The children who shouldn't exist, they became us. And maybe that's the point. Maybe nature didn't make a mistake. Maybe it made a masterpiece. So, the next time you look in the mirror, see the complexity. The bone of a Neanderthal grandfather, the blood of a Denisovan aunt, the eyes of a child born in the shadows who wasn't supposed to live but did. You're not just one thing, you're legacy, you're rebellion. You're what happens when species choose to love instead of fight. The forbidden children were never truly forbidden. They were future, the girl with 3 bloodlines. In the shadow of Siberia's mountains, beneath layers of frost and silence, lies a cave with walls so ancient they remember voices that never touched paper, songs never recorded, names never spoken again. It is called Denisova Cave, a cathedral of stone, a vault of secrets, a graveyard of ghosts. And in 2012, scientists opened that vault and found her, just a fragment of bone, shattered, worn, a sliver of a finger, small enough to miss but large enough to change everything. They called her Denisova 11, a number, a catalogue entry. But behind the sterile name was a girl, a teenager, no more than 13. And what they discovered in her bones shook the foundations of human history. Because this girl, this quiet, unassuming trace of life, didn't belong to one human species. She belonged to 3. Her mother was Neanderthal, a creature of the cold, a woman whose ancestors had walked Europe for 300,000 years, firekeepers, spearmakers, ice-blooded survivors. Her father was Denisovan, a cousin species found across Asia, mountain dwellers, stoneworkers, a mystery people, hidden until now. But when they examined her DNA, they found something stranger still. She didn't just carry traces, she carried pure halves, half Neanderthal, half Denisovan. And in her Denisovan father's blood Neanderthal DNA, 3 bloodlines, 1 body, a biological paradox, an impossible union, and yet she lived. She wasn't a myth, she wasn't a theory, she was a child who breathed, who bled, who laughed, maybe in the halls of that cave under flickering firelight and eternal frost. We'll never know her name, but her story is our inheritance. Denisova Cave had long been a mystery, tucked high in the Altai Mountains, a place where winds speak in forgotten tongues. Before her, the cave had already whispered secrets, a molar too large for modern humans, tools too advanced to be Neanderthal. A 3rd species long hidden, the Denisovans. Until 2010, no one had seen their face. Now we had their daughter, and in her we found a bridge between worlds that should never have touched. Think of what it took for her to exist. A Neanderthal mother, a Denisovan father, 2 different species evolved separately for hundreds of thousands of years, meeting not in battle, but in something far more intimate. Love, or perhaps need, curiosity, desperation. We'll never know. But the result was her. A child who wasn't supposed to be. What did she look like? Was her skin dark like her father's kin from the east? Did she have her mother's heavy brow or something new entirely? Was her voice deeper, her gait unfamiliar, her eyes the colour of glaciers or midnight? We cannot paint her portrait, but we can feel her presence in the DNA, in the silence of the cave, in the way history itself bent around her. Because here's the truth. Until we found her, we believed that interbreeding between human species was rare, accidental, marginal. Then Denisova 11 arrived and proved us wrong. This wasn't an anomaly. This was a pattern. Because her father, Denisova also, had Neanderthal ancestors, which means their two lineages had already mingled before. That species boundaries, so firm in textbooks, were porous in the real world. That love, sex, and life refused to obey the neat diagrams of evolution. Let that sink in. This teenage girl was not the product of a single chance encounter. She was the descendant of a lineage of hybrids, a tapestry woven over millennia. Neanderthals, Denisovans, modern humans, all mixing, all mingling, all rewriting the definition of human. And here's what's even stranger. You carry her legacy. You, reading this now. Because Denisovans didn't vanish completely. Their DNA lives on in the peoples of Melanesia, in indigenous Australians, in Tibetans. A gift passed down from those ancient mountaineers is what lets modern Sherpas breathe thin Himalayan air with the ease of sea-level lungs. We call it the E+1 gene, but it's really her inheritance. A gift from her people, from her blood. And still we don't even know what they looked like. The Denisovans have left us no full skeleton, no complete face, only fragments, like whispers on the wind. It is through her, this girl with 3 bloodlines, that we glimpse the truth. We were never alone. We were never simple. We are not one species. We are a choir of ghosts singing through flesh. What became of her? Did she survive past childhood? Did she become a mother? Was she accepted or feared? Did she walk the ice-covered valleys wondering where she belonged? She was both and neither. A child of 2 tribes, perhaps of 3. In a world where belonging meant survival, where sameness meant safety, what became of the ones who were different? Maybe she died young. Maybe she was celebrated. Maybe she was alone. But one thing is clear. She changed everything. In a world where species were supposed to stay separate, she stood at the crossroads, and she lived. The girl with 3 bloodlines was a warning, a revelation and a promise. She told us that our roots are deeper than we dreamed, that our ancestors reached across boundaries not just to fight, but to hold. That in caves of darkness, lit by embers and fear, they chose connection, even when it defied instinct, even when it risked exile, even when nature itself pushed back. She shouldn't exist, but she did. And now you know her story. Not her voice, not her face, but her meaning. She's proof that every time we try to draw hard lines between us and them, between human and other, we're lying to ourselves. Because we has always been everyone. Ghosts in your DNA. Look down at your hands. Run your fingers across your skin. Breathe in. Hold it. Now exhale. You just felt history move through you. Because in your blood, in the marrow of your bones, in the coils of your DNA lie the ghosts of people who died 40,000 years ago. People who never knew your name, but whose lives, whose choices, whose forbidden loves and final breaths made you. They aren't gone. They're just quiet now. In 2014, scientists analysed the genome of a modern man and found something astonishing. Inside his DNA were fragments that didn't belong to Homo sapiens, not entirely. Pieces of genetic code that matched no living population. Genes with strange signatures, ancient echoes. They belong to Neanderthals, to Denisovans, to someone else. Across Europe and Asia, from the limestone caves of France to the wind-beaten rocks of Siberia, remains of hybrid children emerge. Some are intact, others scattered, some well preserved, others fragmented beyond recognition. But all of them whisper the same story. We were never alone. And our ancestors, they didn't just meet other humans, they merged with them. There's the Lagarvello child in Portugal, a 4-year-old boy with a strange mix of features, too robust for a modern human, too delicate for a Neanderthal. When they reconstructed his skeleton, the conclusion was chilling. Mix of features, too robust for a modern human, too delicate for a Neanderthal. When they reconstructed his skeleton, the conclusion was chilling. He was both the child of a species that should have vanished, but didn't, not entirely. In France, the Mesmaskaya infant, a baby Neanderthal, her tiny bones curled like a comma at the end of a forgotten sentence. She lived briefly, she died silently, but her mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child was unlike anything ever seen. A lineage now extinct, a branch of humanity pruned too soon. And yet, somewhere in your own body, that branch might have left a scar, a quirk, a strength, a vulnerability. Because these ghosts don't linger in stories. They don't haunt caves or echo in bones alone. They haunt you. Your skin's sensitivity to sunlight, your body's response to high altitudes, your immune system's reaction to viruses, your sleep patterns, your emotional volatility. All of this traced to fragments of Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, tiny whispers that guide your biology. Let's talk numbers. If you're of European or Asian descent, you carry 1% to 4% Neanderthal DNA. In some Tibetan populations, you carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA, especially in genes linked to oxygen processing. Even if your ancestry is African, you may still carry traces from back migrations from long-forgotten travelers who returned, but all of them whisper the same story. We were never alone. And our ancestors, they didn't just meet other humans, they merged with them. There's the Lagarvello child in Portugal, a 4-year-old boy with a strange mix of features, too robust for a modern human, too delicate for a Neanderthal. When they reconstructed his skeleton, the conclusion was chilling. He was both the child of a species that should have vanished, but didn't, not entirely. In France, the Mesmaskaya infant, a baby Neanderthal, her tiny bones curled like a comma at the end of a forgotten sentence. She lived briefly, she died silently, but her mitochondrial DNA passed from mother to child was unlike anything ever seen. A lineage now extinct, a branch of humanity pruned too soon. And yet, somewhere in your own body, that branch might have left a scar, a quirk, a strength, a vulnerability. Because these ghosts don't linger in stories. They don't haunt caves or echo in bones alone. They haunt you. Your skin's sensitivity to sunlight, your body's response to high altitudes, your immune system's reaction to viruses, your sleep patterns, your emotional volatility. All of this traced to fragments of Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, tiny whispers that guide your biology. Let's talk numbers. If you're of European or Asian descent, you carry 1% to 4% Neanderthal DNA. In some Tibetan populations, you carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA, especially in genes linked to oxygen processing. Even if your ancestry is African, you may still carry traces from back migrations from long-forgotten travelers who returned, carrying foreign blood like seeds in the folds of a traveler's cloak. These fragments aren't uniform. They're scattered, random, messy. One person may carry a Neanderthal gene that affects pain tolerance, another one that influences depression, another still, a gene that shapes facial structure or metabolism. You are not a pure copy. You're a collage, a patchwork quilt sewn with Ice Age thread. In the bones we find the dead, but in the genes we find the living. Every child born today inherits 3 billion base pairs of DNA, most of it human, but not all. Tucked among that spiral staircase of code are instructions written by vanished hands. A Neanderthal ancestor who survived a glacial famine, a Denisovan matriarch who birthed children in the shadows of mountains, a hybrid boy who was sterile, but whose sister's children thrived. Their stories are buried in your blood. Some of these ghosts are blessings. Neanderthal genes helped early humans adapt to new environments, colder climates, pathogen-rich forests, new diets. Denisovan DNA gave Sherpas their superpower, surviving thin air on the roof of the world. Without them, modern humans might not have made it out of Africa, or across the Alps, or up into the Himalayas. Their gifts became our survival tools. But not all ghosts are kind. Some Neanderthal gene fragments are linked to autoimmune disorders, to diabetes, to depression, to nicotine addiction, to COVID-19 vulnerability. It's not poetic justice, it's evolutionary trade-off. Genes that once helped our ancestors survive Ice Age viruses may now cause our bodies to attack themselves. The past still shaping the present, in ways we never consented to but still inherit. The deeper scientists dig, the stranger the stories get. In 2020, a team mapped Neanderthal DNA fragments across thousands of modern genomes. They found entire chromosomes unchanged for 40,000 years. It was like reading love letters written in a dead language but still addressed to us. One gene told the body how to process fat, another how to regulate sleep. Still others are complete mysteries. We don't know what they do, only that they don't come from us. You're not who you think you are. You're a walking, breathing crypt of ancient species. You're carrying passengers, not ghosts that haunt, but ghosts that build. You're a city built atop ruins. Your veins run through buried graves. Your hands are carved from forgotten tools. Your brain sings songs of ancestors whose names were never written. You are the final sentence of a book still being written by fingers long turned to dust. And here's the twist. These hybrid children, the ones born of forbidden unions, they weren't the exception. They were the beginning of you. Without them, your family tree never blooms. Your story ends before it begins. They are not myth. They are not footnotes. They are the main characters. The girl from Denisova Cave. The boy buried in Portugal. The hybrid mother who nursed a child that would carry her legacy through tens of thousands of years. They didn't disappear. They became us. So the next time someone speaks of purity, of bloodlines, of who belongs and who doesn't remember your ghosts, they crossed continents. They defied nature. They fell in love with enemies. They died in pain. They lived in hope. And they whispered across time so that you could be born. Their fingerprints are on your lungs. Their breath is in your voice. Their fear, their fire, their DNA, it's all still here, in you, right now. You carry their memory, and whether you know it or not, you are one of them. The final irony. Take a look at your reflection. Study it. Not just the face, but what lies beneath. The brow ridge, the jawline, the structure of your sinuses, the colour of your skin, the way your hair curls or falls, the rhythms of your breath. Now ask yourself the question no one dares to voice. Who are you really? The answer is not pure, not simple, not clean. The answer is that you are a collision, a living contradiction, a mosaic of ancient strangers, a paradox wrapped in skin. And here lies the final irony. Everything racist ideologies believe every notion of blood purity, of chosen peoples, of superior races, collapses under the weight of a single fact. There is no such thing as a pure human. Not now, not ever. Your body carries the DNA of beings once considered inhuman, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, the hybrid children who weren't supposed to live. You are the offspring of a love affair between what once were enemies, between what textbooks once divided, between what myths once demonized. And still, here you are, breathing, thinking, existing, the product of every forbidden union that history tried to erase. The ancient world didn't care for labels. Nature didn't know borders. Tribes warred, but they also merged. Species clashed, but they also kissed. We've found the bones. We've read the genes. The stories written in your blood laugh at your flags, mock your chants, burn your walls to ash. Because the thing you think makes you better. Your strength, your wit, your resilience came not from dominance but from merging. Let's make this brutally clear. If you're of European descent, you carry Neanderthal DNA. If you're of Asian descent, you may carry even more. If you're African, your ancestors, who returned from Eurasia long ago, brought ancient interbreeding back with them. No one was spared. No one was pure. The very idea of racial purity is a fantasy that your own bones betray. You can't hate the other without hating yourself. Imagine the face of a white supremacist. Now imagine the face of a Neanderthal heavy brow, broad nose, robust build. Now imagine telling that supremacist that 2% of his DNA comes from that face. Imagine showing him a printout of his genome highlighted in red, proving that he is the child of someone he would have spat on. That's the final irony. The bloodlines he claims to defend are already blended. The wall he tries to build is inside his own veins, and it's cracked. In every battle of us versus them, there's a deeper truth. There was never an us. There was never a them. There was only collision. Only, change only, humans meeting humans in caves, in fields, in firelight, sometimes with violence, sometimes with fear, and sometimes with love. They didn't call each other names, they didn't argue about flags, they didn't see skin colour as status. They were just cold and hungry and curious and lonely. And in that shared vulnerability, they connected. They didn't know they were rewriting evolution. They were just trying to survive. And in doing so, they passed the torture genetic flame that still flickers in every cell of your body. This isn't philosophy. This is biology. You can see it in your genes. You can read it in your chromosomes. Science has peeled back the skin of prejudice and found common ancestors. You share DNA with the same people you were told to fear. That's not opinion, that's math. But the lie of purity is persistent, addictive, comforting. It tells you that you're special, that you belong more than others, that your blood is clean, your lineage superior. It makes you feel safe in a world that's always been uncertain. But it's still a lie, and it's a dangerous one. Because every atrocity in history, every genocide, every war of race or blood was built on that false foundation. And now, with genetic evidence in hand, we can finally destroy it. Let's go back to that moment 50,000 years ago. A Neanderthal man, a Homo sapiens woman. They meet not in battle, not in conquest. In silence, in wonder, in firelight, their hands meet, their breaths mingle, their fates intertwine. That moment created you. Do you think they cared about race? No, because they had no word for it. Because they knew what we have forgotten, that survival doesn't come from purity. It comes from unity. So here's what you need to remember when the world tries to divide you. When they shout, go back to where you came from. When they say we're not like them. When they talk of superior bloodlines. They're lying, and their DNA proves it. You come from 1,000 tribes, from rivers and deserts, from tundra and savanna, from skulls buried in France and teeth lost in Siberia. You come from the clash of species and the touch of strangers. You're a living monument to unity through chaos. You're a temple built from stolen stones. and your walls are made from what others would reject. So what now? You could ignore this truth, pretend you didn't read it, go back to easy answers, to us versus them, to walls and wars and hate. Or you could evolve. You could remember what your ancestors already knew, that we all come from the same fire, that your enemy might be your ancestor, that your reflection is a chorus of forgotten voices all singing the same song. We are one. So the next time someone tells you they're better because of their skin or blood or history, ask them, which part? The Neanderthal? The Denisovan? The hybrid child lost in a cave? Because all of it is inside them. All of it is inside you. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson from the longest war in human history, that the only way we survived was not through conquest, but through connection. You are not a nation. You are not a race. You are not a label on a census form. You are an echo, a fusion, a contradiction, a child of enemies who became family. You are the final irony, and the future begins when you accept that we are all them, the mirror of the past. Take a moment, find a mirror, stand in front of it, and look. Not a glance, not a pass-by flicker, but a long, deliberate look. Let your eyes settle into your reflection. Let silence grow. Let it breathe. Now, ask yourself the question you've been circling for 14 chapters. Who am I? Not the name, not the job title, not the passport. Something deeper. Because what stares back at you now is not just you, it's 300,000 years of faces, eyes blinking open in cold caves, hands striking sparks from flint, bodies surviving the ice and finding warmth in the unlikeliest arms. That reflection in the mirror is not a single face. It's a mosaic of love and betrayal, of firelit trysts and battlefield screams, of whispered lullabies in unfamiliar tongues, of blood spilled and blood mingled. You're not Homo sapiens, not entirely, you never were. You're hybrid, your legacy, your contradiction. You carry the bruises of extinction and the miracles of survival. Behind your forehead is the brain of a storyteller that evolved to imagine gods, paint stars, and plan vengeance. In your lungs is a Neanderthal gene that helps you climb mountains without gasping. In your skin is a Denisovan gift protection from UV, a memory of high-altitude sun. In your sleep cycles are ancestral rhythms, faint pulses from camps long buried. You're not one species, you're not one line. You're a braided rope of human histories, knotted, frayed, but unbroken. We like to think we're special, and we are, but not because we're pure. We are special because we're stitched together, because our ancestors fought and fled and loved and wept and didn't give up. They didn't choose purity. They chose connection. And that's why you're here. Not because of one tribe's triumph, but because of what happened when boundaries blurred and strangers became family. That mirror is a time machine. Every molecule in your face comes with a passport stamped from a different epoch. There's the ridge of your brow, Neanderthal, the pigment in your Arissa Denisovan variation, the cadence of your voice, shaped by sapiens' song, but perhaps softened by ancient whispers from species that left no names. You don't look like one person. You look like humanity remembering itself. And now that you know, what do you do with it? You've walked through caves and cold tombs. You've seen murder and mercy. You've met the hybrid children, the lovers, the warriors. You've faced the lies of purity and supremacy and tribe. Now comes the hardest part, forgiveness. Can you forgive your ancestors for what they did to survive? The blood they spilled? The children they buried too soon? The enemies they made into lovers? And the lovers they sometimes turned into ghosts? Can you forgive yourself for the stories you believed? For the times you thought you were better, more human than someone else? Can you stand in that mirror and see not just your features but your legacy? There are no pure humans. There are only stories we keep telling until they feel like truth. But DNA doesn't lie, it remembers. It remembers the Neanderthal mother who watched her hybrid son play with children who didn't share his brow. It remembers the modern human father who whispered songs to a baby with ancient eyes. It remembers the fights, the fire, the night it snowed so heavily that both species huddled together in silence, because cold doesn't care what species you are. And now you remember too. So, what now? How will you walk into the world with this knowledge? Will you cling to old labels, to myths that divide? Or will you step out of the cave and face the world as it truly is? A patchwork of survivors, a people made whole by becoming broken together. The Neanderthals are gone, but they're not. They left us fire not the kind that burns, but the kind that glows quietly in your chest. Their blood sings in your veins every time you take a deep breath, or wake before the dawn, or feel more at home in winter than in summer. The Denisovans are gone, but they're not. Their legacy whispers on high mountain winds, in lungs that fill easily with thin air. You don't need to build a time machine to meet them, you already carry them. So look in the mirror one last time, not to judge, not to critique, but to greet, say hello to the Neanderthal in your skin, to the modern human in your mind, to the ancient ones who danced, who fought, who loved so that you could stand exactly where you are. Say hello to yourself, and say thank you. The past isn't behind you, it's within you. Every time you walk into the sun, or fall in love, or hold your child's hand, you are carrying thousands of ancestors with you. They didn't vanish, they became you. That mirror is not a finish line, it's a window. It doesn't show who you are. It shows how far you've come, and how far we all still have to go. We are not Homo sapiens, we are not Neanderthals, we are not labels. We are human, not despite our differences, but because of them.